Now, just before we came on air, I spoke to Alastair Campbell, Tony Blair's former Director of Communications, now, of course, famous for his podcast, The Rest of Politics, to get his take on the new party. We also spoke about the launch of the new Lost Boys task force that he's involved in. Now, the group's proposing a trusted adult guarantee scheme that would train 10,000 adults to act as role models to young people. Take a listen. Thank you so much for being on the programme. It's always good to talk to you. And I'm really interested to hear more about this Lost Boys project. Tell me about what's that all about?
Well, it really has flowed from all sorts of things coming together. You had Gareth Southgate's Dimbleby lecture, you had adolescence, and the kind of continuing debate about angry young men feeling lost and confused and all the stuff that we hear about. And it was actually a guy called Paul Barber, who's the chief executive of Brighton and Hove Albion Football Club, who I think himself at one point was a bit lost and confused as a young man. But he was lucky enough to find a mentor who really kind of looked after him and helped him and supported him through it. So he asked me to join this task force, which is made up of all sorts of different people from business, from sport, from politics, but crucially also from young adults who have had the benefit of a trusted adult. And so what we've done is, rather than just kind of try and dive into everything, all the things that you might think are important, this is just to focus on this one call on the government, really, to support the idea of every young man having access to a trusted adult. And that's a kind of well-known concept of somebody outside the family that somebody feels they can go to for support, particularly when they're struggling. And it's not much money. It's basically a few £1 million. We're trying to get football clubs also funding this in part. And the government's role will be essentially to fund the training of 10,000 trusted adults in education and sports settings, particularly for boys growing up in poverty, and then help track the progress of this. So, I think it's a very simple, straightforward idea. I think it's just one thing. I'm not pretending this is going to, end all the problems of the manosphere, but I think it's just indicating that there are ideas out there, there are people really keen to help. And so that's it. That's what we're doing.
I'm really interested in this issue. Like you say, after adolescence, it felt like it was something we talked about an awful lot, and there's been a lot of debate about some of those other influences that people experience. We talk a lot about toxic masculinity, and I'll be honest, it's a phrase that I kind of hate, because I kind of think that, masculinity itself isn't toxic, it's something that we should celebrate. But, are you worried about the influence of some of these that some people have when it comes to, I guess, particularly in the digital space?
No, there's no doubt about that. I think that people talk a lot about Andrew Tate. I think Andrew Tate's maybe less influential than he was. I think, there's another project that's been going on recently, which you may have heard about. There was a big piece in The Observer about it at the weekend. Peter Hyman, my former colleague in Downing Street, he's actually been out talking to thousands of 17-year-olds just to find out what they're really thinking. And actually their online influences sometimes are a bit more surprising. But there's no doubt at all that the digital space has made it easier to groom people, to radicalise them in a way that maybe will turn them into people that they wouldn't, necessarily be if they were getting proper guidance, proper support within the family, within school and education, and so forth. And look, I get what you say about not. I agree with you. Masculinity, there's nothing wrong with it. I think what people mean by toxic masculinity is when that slips into, misogyny, hatred of women, violence against women, the feeling that, young men should be allowed to do what the hell they want. I think that's what I think people mean by toxic masculinity. But I think what this has done, there was a interview on one of the radio stations this morning with a young guy who's been involved in this called Yas, and he talks very openly about the fact that if he hadn't, his trusted adult is a guy called Pedro, and if he's convinced that if he hadn't have got him at the time that he did, offering the support that he does, he'd either be dead or in prison. And he says that half of his friends are already dead or in prison. So I think there is a sense, and we're talking here about roughly 630,000 young people in England who don't have what we would define as a trusted adult outside the family. And I think that's, it's a big number. It's worth looking at.
So important, as you say. Have you ever felt like a lost boy yourself?
Well, maybe not a boy, but certainly a lost young man. Um, and that probably started in childhood. I was lucky with two parents, loving family. I did actually have trusted adults outside the family, people I felt I could go and talk to, maybe about stuff that you didn't necessarily want to talk to people inside the family. But look, I had a drink problem in my early 20s. I mean, that came out somewhere. And so, and I think the thing is, I've always, you talk about toxic masculinity, I'm regularly called a quotes alpha male. And I don't even know what it means, but I also do understand that I think young men in particular these days there is real sensitivity there is fear there is anger there. And of course, you're a politics program. I always feel that in politics, you have politicians who exploit problems and politicians who address problems. And at the moment, the politicians who exploit problems, not least people like Farage on the right and Reform, that they're very, very loud. Nigel Farage very proudly has more followers on TikTok than every other MP combined. Well, TikTok is a massively important place in terms of where young men are engaging, insofar as they are engaging with politics and the political debate. So I think we've got to get more and better voices out there. And this is just one idea, as I say, to try to say to young men that who may be feeling lonely, may be feeling isolated and angry, that, maybe think about checking this out and finding the right person for you that you go to when you're struggling.
I think it's a great thing. I really do. As someone who I've been very aware about the debate that we have around girls and women, rightly, of course, but I think that sometimes it's important to realise that we need to do more talking about our boys and our young men.
Yeah. Well, because I actually don't buy the idea that feminism has won and that women have now got all the power and the top jobs. I think it's nonsense. However, I do think the fact that there has been so much focus on that debate means that sometimes young men think, well, it's all about the girls. The girls get everything. Now, it's not true, but it feeds into that sense of, nobody really cares about us. So I think it's just about showing, well, people do care and people do want to give people support.
While I've got you, I've got to ask about this new party that's launching today, involving, of course, Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana. I mean, do you think they're the real deal?
Well, no, but I do think it's a sign of a time when politics is maybe becoming more fragmented. Look, the Labour Party is in government. It's got a big majority. I think the way to deal with both Reform and a new left-wing party is actually, if the Labour government just to govern well and do the things that they said they were going to do. But there's no doubt Jeremy Corbyn has a following. He's got a certain appeal to a certain demographic. I think coming along at the time when Gaza is back, really back in the news. I mean, it should never have left the news, but it's right back there at the heart of it. I suspect that's why they've chosen now to launch this. But Labour's got to govern well and have the British people understand that they're governing for them. And, Jeremy Corbyn will do what Jeremy Corbyn does.
I mean, you mentioned there Gaza, and obviously part of the defining mission of this new party is to speak up for Palestine. Do you think that, I guess, Labour should have taken a tougher position when it comes to Gaza? Should they recognise Palestine as a state, for example?
Well, I would like them to, and I think that they should. But I'd like to see that, along with other countries doing the same thing, and along with a credible peace plan being put together. I think that one of the things that's happened is that because Donald Trump's president of America and there's so much focus on him, and because he doesn't believe in international institutions and he likes to cut other people out, it's almost as if the only power it feels in this debate is Israel itself, where I think it's abusing that power to the point of genocide and certainly crimes against humanity, and Trump. Well, the other countries are not powerless. I mean, they may be less powerful because the United Nations has been sort of cut down and the other international institutions. But I think that Britain still has a voice and people want to hear that voice. I actually think that there's some of the things that David Lammy was talking about the other day. He's done the right thing in all sorts of different areas. But an awful lot of people out there aren't really aware, don't really sense that Britain is really speaking up with the anger and the passion that people feel. Now, ultimately, the role of government is to try to get a ceasefire, get a peace deal in the end. And I think the role that Britain can play in that right now is actually to say, look, this isn't just about Israel and America. This is about the rest of the world. The whole world feels engaged in this. And I actually do think that recognition of Palestine will be part of some of the things that the British government can come together with other governments and really put it, make a mark on this.
Okay, really good to speak to you. Thank you very much indeed for being on the programme.
Thanks a lot.